Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again. Another week has sped past and I'm joined again by my friend and colleague, Mr. Stephen Dickson. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Chris. How are you doing?
Not too bad, my friend. Not too bad. Not too bad. Weather's getting better. Days are getting longer. Things are getting brighter. That old light at the end of the tunnel starting to flicker a little bit more buoyantly now. So touch wood and please God, things are getting better.
I do hope that the days are not getting longer on the when you live on the equator. That was something seriously wrong with the with the with the solar system. Then, if that is the case, I'm not really sure what'd be going on. My days are 12 hours a day every day, Chris. For that. Well, the day's not 12 hours, obviously, but you know what I mean. We don't have many seasons here. Although I'm sitting in the garden, which I'm guessing it'd be a bit chilly for you to do at home.
Yeah, but I reckon in the next couple of weeks I might be able to do the same. So, but Steve,
you were making snow angels last month, and next month you'll be out there with your budgie smugglers on.
Oh yeah. The old snow angel. Yep. Back still playing up from that actually.
Yeah. But the granddaughter thought it was great fun. So yeah, that was amazing.
No, she did. Yeah, no, she did. She thought it was that her pops was doing snow angels. Not a good example to set, but nonetheless, now. Good news, and I'm saying good news, Steve, because like at last, and I know we've both been saying about how negative some of the media and press are, but now some of the television I'm putting on, they're showing lots of positive stories. You know, like there's one show here on BBC that once a week they have a good news story, and it is so popular and it is so heartening. It's fantastic.
Highly unlike the BBC.
No, but seriously, it's good. It's good. And what they do is they show people that are doing so much for so many. And some of the people that are doing it, you know, they're the ones that have probably got things that they're having to contend with more than others. But it's brilliant what they're doing. And now when you take it over into the industry, you've got the likes of Qatar and Cargolux now, partnering up and joining up with UNICEF. You know, for humanitarian air freight initiatives, which is great to see, especially at these times. You've got American Airlines now partnering with the American Red Cross to aid with the winter storms. So it's good, even in the midst of such terrible and gloomy results that everybody's expecting now. But things are starting to come through after the end of 2020. So you've got Air France and KLM. You know, 7.1 billion euros loss, which is, I mean, it's phenomenal numbers.
Amazing, in the negative sense. I mean, amazing we generally use to describe things that are positive, but you know, amazingly, the extent of some of these losses, Chris. But no surprise. And I think I was having a conversation this week with a friend of mine who's a pilot, and we had a disagreement several months ago. She had, for the want of a better story, sort of been a bit more supportive towards the demands of the cabin crew unions in the UK. Who, my view was quite simple. They'd buried their head in the sands, stuck their fingers in the air, pretended this wasn't all going on. Insisting that their employment remain as is, and the employer just maintain the status quo. Because of course, the airline would have been lying to them and telling porky pies and about how deeply damaging this would be. Anyway, it was nice to see her the other day, and she was on a trip, and she sort of said, look, thinking back now, it's a hell of a lot worse than they had told us it was going to be. And thinking back now with the benefit of hindsight, yet we completely now understand the actions that the company has taken. Might not always have agreed with them, and they might have been tough to swallow. These bitter pills are never easy to swallow. But I think that is when you're so in the thick of it, and you're emotionally attached, obviously, to a lot of colleagues who are going through difficult times and tough times. As many have, it is difficult always to see that sort of bigger picture and take yourself out of it and look at it on more on a macro level, that I've always tried to do, and that's what we were saying from the beginning. I think one of the first few programs that we were doing, Chris, we were discussing when the companies were sort of making these calls very early on in the pandemic response, and I was largely supportive. I think we were collectively largely supportive of everything that
Yeah.
was being done, as difficult as it was. But not everybody was, and so therefore, it takes time to sort of go through on that change journey. But the final part of dealing with change is sort of acceptance, and then embracing the change to move on to the next level. So hopefully now we can start to see that the tide is turning. You say there has been many more good news stories, I think, in the last week to 10 days than there has probably been throughout the whole affair, including some of these wealthy nations like the G7 getting together, Chris.
Yeah.
As I had said, the UK had already put £1 billion into the COVAX fund, and woefully and dismally, countries like the US and France and Germany and the large economies of the world had not done so. So I think Prime Minister Johnson took that to the G7 yesterday, and they've largely now agreed that is the right thing to do, and will be spreading the good that comes from surplus vaccines to other. So I think with all of that combined, as well as the vaccine race taking really good effect, and some other good news in tourism, I think you're absolutely right. I think we are now starting to come out of I wouldn't say we're out of the woods just yet. From my read, I think there was still sort of a time lag, a time delay to, vaccination, prevalation or penetration across society, restoring that confidence both in business and in the consumer before you start to see the upside. But anyway, I think we're certainly now on the right path to the recovery. That's for sure.
Yeah, and every step forward now, people can start to see that they're moving forward together. And I think I was so pleased to start hearing people talking about data-driven decision making, not dates and promises and perceptions. And I think the one thing people have learned now is that you can't make optimistic forecasts if you don't have something to base it on. And now there's a lot more. I was watching again some news and also talking to people abroad, and they're saying that they would prefer now that this is done the correct way and maybe a little bit longer, but that they don't have to go back into further lockdowns. And I think that's the wisest decision now. So once people know if you hit a certain target, this is going to happen, then you monitor it for 3 weeks. If things are still in control, then your next stage.
I think there's no harm also. I mean, I think the appetite from the public for data has been insatiable, I think, and nothing I think anybody's ever seen before. The problem is, how does one respond to that data? So if there are a number of different data points and collectively there has to be an assessment made in terms of balanced scorecard, what the press will do, or average Joe on the street, or Brenda from Bristol will do, is Brenda will say, well, that's the number they said they should be opening everything up again. But actually, it's got to be a collective and a balance of measures, I think, Chris. So we do have to be careful, I think, the data that we give to the public. I don't think the public are fully capable of responding in a responsible way to sometimes the data that they're given. And therefore, I do, with the member of public myself, not suggesting that you or I are any better at that, Chris, than others. But we do have to be careful, I think, about the level of granularity that we share, and therefore I do think there are some things that are best kept behind closed doors, and for scientists and advisors and ministers to keep to themselves without telling anyone.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And on that note, there's lots of speculation now. They've had, and again, it's press driven, and it's misinformation, and misinformation is ahead of fact at the moment. It's been around a lot longer, because people haven't known the facts. So all this misinformation and speculation is gearing people up, and it's a terrible thing. But when you look at it, and now where people are looking at no jab, no job, and all these sort of sayings, and it's a terrible thing to say. However, I think there's got to be a degree of truth in it. And had an really interesting discussion with a gentleman. I was so interested in listening to him, and he was so good at explaining everything. His name's Shawn Richards. He's the CEO from Ink Aviation, and they provide technology solutions. So what they do is they look at how to control and how to organize and how to make sure that all the correct information is there available. And we were talking about vaccines, and we were talking about the problem recently on some of the borders where people have been coming in with certificates and then looking at some of the fraudulent activity whereby people were actually offering the correct certificate to allow you to travel so that you could bypass any situation. I mean, that's absolutely terrible. But what we were talking about was, if people start to appreciate why something is happening and they fully understand the why, it's a lot more acceptable. Whereas people are being told things now and they're assuming it's true. And there's so much data out there and so much that can be found on each of us when we're traveling, that why would you not want touchless and help? So why would you not want to be able to print your own boarding pass at home? You know, make sure everything's done properly, save time when you get to an airport, allow the airport, if they've got to exercise greater social distancing, to have more people, because people are going in a methodical and in a structured and organized way. And now that people are saying you can come to our country, because some of the countries that are falling behind with the vaccines, they've got a balance now, Steve, of if science can prove that there's less chance of being affected or infected by somebody who's been vaccinated, then why not let them come to that country to help generate the economy? And then they're getting the best of the both whilst they're waiting for their own to get vaccinated. So you've seen the news with Greece. Greece is saying that, you know, if anybody's had a vaccination now, they may well be welcome to come in. Now, if I was running a venue that relied on lots of people, or as many as possible, and I had the choice of saying, well, guess what? You can come in if you've got a vaccination certificate, or if you've been tested within the last 72 hours, to generate an extra degree of confidence for people to come in. And it was my business. I would do it. And I would do it readily tomorrow, because I think there would be a flood of people to get there. And especially things like, you know, Saga safe cruises, you know, just playing on my age bracket, Steve. But Saga, you know, if people know that they've got a greater degree of safety and security, they're going to do it. And I think, why not, you know?
I see you took the lead there, Chris, on the age front before I got in.
Always better, because I'm assuming poor old Brenda from Bristol is in my age bracket as well. And at this point, we have to make a disclaimer.
Oh, I suspect Brenda.
Oh, Brenda is fictitious, and it could have been anybody's name.
No, Brenda was the lady, the famous lady, of course, that said during the election, the announcement of another election. I think it was the 2017 election. So, or maybe it was 19. But she said she was famously interviewed on the street for a vox pop for the BBC or some other media organization, and she said that she was asked, she was told by the journalist, of course, that the Prime Minister had announced an election. And her response was, like the whole of the country, Brenda spoke for the whole of the United Kingdom. She said in her Bristolian accent, which I won't try to do, which is a pretty intense accent if you know that part of England.
Yeah.
She said, "Oh no, not another bloody one," which I think sort of summed up the view of every man up and down the country. So Brenda from Bristol now is used, of course, as an analogy for public sentiment. Anyway, Chris, I just wanted to touch on that. I mean, I do think, you know, I've said to you before, I'm not keen on our liberties being taken away by the need for a passport. I'm not very keen on creating another division and creating more haves and or less haves and more have-nots. I think that is a bad approach for society when it comes to access to bars, restaurants, etc., cinemas, and the like. I do think there's something to be said about staff vaccinations. My view is that, I mean, personally, I'm not one of these lunatics who's an anti-vaxxers. These are all clowns normally with some deranged view about the vaccine. But it's your personal choice. Personally, I don't choose to get the flu vaccine every year because I think I'm a low risk. If you choose not to get the COVID vaccine, well, that's entirely up to you. But it should not prohibit you from being employed. Now, if that is the case, why do we not vaccinate mandatory for flu? Why do we not vaccinate mandatory for pneumonia and other diseases that are, you know, people? There are far more people every year on a rolling basis, Chris, with these diseases. We don't have that as mandatory vaccine. We have MMR as mandatory vaccines. We have chickenpox as mandatory vaccines. We have all these other sort of things that are mandatory, polio, etc. But if they want to do that, I think the best sort of time to start is surely for children.
Which they're
and make
trying
it
to
part.
do now, Steve.
What's part of the mandatory vaccination portfolio?
No. What they're
Well,
trying to do now is they're trying to test it so that this vaccine now will be made available, to people at different times than anybody would have expected, to prevent it from happening in the future. Ideally, they'd like to give youngsters a vaccine at a certain age to protect them for the rest of their life.
Fine, absolutely bob on. But if you don't have that vaccine, you were suggesting that there are some employers that would take a dim view if you're not COVID vaccinated.
No, I'm talking about people who had businesses, Steve. The no jab, no job. That's just something that's being pushed out there at the moment.
But that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm totally against. That's what I'm totally against.
But if I had a business and it was a lovely pub restaurant, or it was a concert venue or whatever, and I had the opportunity of allowing more people in there because of the fact that they were vaccinated or they'd had a test, I would want to do it. And I'd want to do it with technology that was secure, because, as you know, if anything on a piece of paper gives somebody else an opportunity to deface it or to change it or to manipulate it for advantage, and a little bit like going to a football match, you'd end up getting touts outside saying, if you need a certificate, I've got one here. If you need this, I've got one here. So it needs to be a marriage between really, really good, effective technology, which at the end of the day, Steve, with CCTV cameras and everything else, they've got facial recognition. A lot of that's already there now. So why not protect it? If you look at security, when we had the issues, I mean, look at how people responded when every single place you went into, you had to have your bags, ladies with their handbags, men with their turning their pockets out. That changed the world, but it made it a safer place. And I think, to a degree, this is something to make,
but Chris,
make people want to be safe and to save others.
Well, look, to an extent, I guess, but running a business, you accept a level of risk as you possibly can, for as sustainable period as you possibly can. And managing out risk is something that we do every day in the aviation business. But for example, I mean, there are risks that we accept today. I mean, flying, there are many risks involved in flying. And if you take the aviation security example that you sort of touched on there, we don't do, some countries, we still don't have 100% air cargo security screening. In the UK environment, it's not required to do a PAT for every person. You do, or ETDs, you do it on a random and continuous basis. You don't check every person for ETD swabs, etc. So I would have to disagree, therefore, and say, look, we accept that going either traveling or being in business, there are risks that we just don't mitigate out fully. What you do is you take a pragmatic view and say, well, if I could potentially have, now here's the real anecdote. In the last week alone, I've spoken to more people that I know that have been vaccinated than I know have had COVID personally.
Yeah.
So I find that an astonishing number. On that basis, you might get to the point, Chris, where you tip the balance and say, well, actually, if that is the case, and we know that the majority of the population is vaccinated, or all of the risk groups for those who choose to be vaccinated are vaccinated, then we'll unlock and we'll open. I don't think you can say that you need a smartphone to enter a pub or a restaurant. I think that's going down a very dangerous, very sticky path that I would not support or endorse at all. It's the same as some of these airlines have said, you must have a vaccination certificate to fly. I think actually it should probably potentially be the view of the destination country or the countries and the states to have a joined up approach that says, what are the requirements for travel, not individual airlines trying to use it as some competitive advantage against others. I find that really distasteful.
Yeah, no, we're in agreement with that. It shouldn't be seen as a league table or as a one-upmanship. But if somebody, like you just mentioned, a country, if a country says, like say Greece or Spain, if they were to say, look, we feel that we've done a risk assessment and all those that are vaccinated have got a lesser chance of infecting any of our population until we get to a point where we're at similar levels, we would welcome you in. Okay. Or, like I said, not a government saying, if you don't have a jab, you don't have a job. But if I was running a restaurant, a bar, or if I was running a small business and I felt that by limiting it or identifying the type of customer that could come in at that given time was with a vaccine or with a legitimate test that had good digital credibility, okay, I think that would enhance the confidence of the consumer, who would then want to go to a venue that they perceived as being much safer, which is why the touchless model is becoming so popular now. It's being talked about. And I'll give you an example, right? So for the last several years, all right, I've gone on holiday to Spain. So the airport that we choose is normally the same. We get there, okay, and you've already done your own check-in. You've already got your boarding pass, but you have to still deposit your bag. The queues are still phenomenal, okay? And everybody moans in the queue. Why don't they have people at check-in? Why don't they do this? Only to save money, etc. Well, it's not. It's just people's acceptance of that process and their determination to do it properly instead of finding something wrong. I think now this last year has sped up all levels of technology, touchless, online shopping, e-commerce, everything. So now we should capitalize on that and move it forward. But we should be explaining to people why, not what you
I would
have
agree.
to do.
Chris, I would agree entirely. And look, what the self-service agenda, or the off-airport, processing, off-airport check-in, if you like, initiative has been around for years and years and years. And in fact, I remember as part of the next generation check-in project for Qantas, and we implemented our first self-bag drop in 2010 in Perth on trial, and we rolled them out across all the domestic ports, and they were all done by 2012. So in some parts of the world, they've really got a lead on others. And this is not new technology. This is technology been around for a very long time. I have to say there are many laggards out there, and people pretend that our aviation business is complex, it's terribly difficult, and oh, you young man, you'll never understand. Oh, you couldn't possibly do that. Well, actually, the last 12 months has shown otherwise. There's many other ways, different ways to do things. But actually, these lessons have been around for 20 years, if not more, Chris. So I don't buy that this is new. I think what we're saying is that this is accelerated. Accelerate some of the thinking and some of the implementation. Look, there's so much more that can be done in this space. So much more.
Yeah. And coming back now to technology and people's appetite to accept it more. Another thing that Qatar are doing, they've got they've led the way now with this touch-free IFE, the Inflight entertainment system. So now you can do it off of your own device, and you don't even have to touch that. You don't even have to get involved in that. So I mean, it's incredible what people are doing now and what they're presenting to the consumers.
Well, again, most passengers have been taking their own devices for a very long time. I never watched the IFE on an aircraft. I tend to always download everything to my iPad, BBC iPlayer or Netflix or whatever it is that you choose, Sky Go, and use your own device. I think airlines actually could probably get rid of a lot of that IFE hardware, heavy kit that sits in these back of seats, and many people don't touch it anyway. And actually create a streaming service on board for connectivity that allows people to remove it. That's been spoken about for 5, 6, 7 years, as far as I remember. So again, nothing is new. We just seem really slow to implement anything in aviation. It's utterly frustrating when you look at other industries, particularly in the likes of fintech and this kind of space. What they're doing now in fintech is amazing. If they got any fintech professionals that come and look at aviation, they think that we were retrograde kind of Neanderthals.
Yeah. And some most definitely are. You're right there. Now, another good thing is.
I know what you're doing there. You were thinking about some names in your head there, but don't, Chris, don't do it.
Yeah. One day I'd love to, and some people that I'd like to name. I said on a podcast with a guy, we were talking about how certain individuals and character types can actually affect and ruin other people's lives, and why they're allowed to remain in organizations for so long. And it's this fear and and favor and all these sort of things that are going. And I actually said, I'd love to name a few, when I decide that's it. Yeah. But those that I would like to name, I definitely hope that they've had perpetual constipation for the last God knows how many years since they first started being a pain in the butt. So if anybody out there feels that they're in that category, they know who they are. Now coming back, but getting back now to the to the vaccine, the rollout, and obviously everybody getting it. Everybody now is doing a greater degree of risk assessment because they're having to. They're also looking at what was done before. So many parts of our business and organization that went down the path of GDP, CEIV, they've come out of it really well. And those that were focused an awful lot on perishable movement. So it's nice also to see Nairobi in Kenya. I know Nairobi very well, but also saying that because of their experiences, they're very, very well prepared. So that's also good. But in many other areas, the handling of pharma hasn't been as good as it should. Even the handling of some perishables hasn't been as good as it should. So I also hope that because of what's happening now, there's going to be improvements in those areas as well. And it'll be all for the good.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, look, I guess it's sort of, this continuous improvement or, striving for excellence that has been spurred on, or the catalyst is probably the, a lot of airlines may not have done much in the pharma space, or logistics firms done much in pharma space, Chris, historically. And so, this is new to them, but I think coming into it new actually is probably an advantage in many regards, because they can take a critical lens over an area that they haven't been exposed to necessarily before, and therefore, providing the right protocols and the guidelines and the sort of handling capabilities are identified. I think they can probably do very well. We have seen that, and I know you and I have been speaking to some of our customers and clients, specifically these challenges and points that they wouldn't have had to consider before. So I think it's all part of building back better, Chris.
Yep, or bringing it back better, so that when the bounce back better happens, everybody's much more aware and capable. So it's a little bit like they're doing a bit of pre-season training, which is so important. Now, when we do build back, bring back, or bounce back, okay, there's going to be a huge uptake, a huge amount of demand. Now, I've already started to see some of the fare increases and some of the packages where people are looking ahead to when they think it's safe to be promoting certain fares. They're going to go up. They're going to go up steeply, Steve.
Yep. Yeah, I think I wouldn't quite like to say with such authority that the days of low fares as we know it are gone, because I suspect that a certain Varady Joseph and Michael O'Leary would vehemently disagree. But I do think that in incurring, with essentially massive or essentially total shutdown of the aviation industry in some parts, there are many there's a lot of debt now being carried on the books. That's going to be financed. We're quite lucky that cash is still quite cheap. Had we gone into this a few years ago, it would have been a different story. But so that has to be paid for. The other aspect, Chris, is typically our business is a volume game. It's a bums on seats game.
Yeah.
So the less bums on seats, I suspect that by default pushes up the average fares. There will be a slow, cautious restart or recovery, and therefore fares will reflect that. I do think once we get going in several months' time, probably towards the end of this year, beginning of 2022. It's the first time I've used 2022 in a sentence. Goodness me, that sounds very far away, but probably it's not. I do think that we'll start to see levels of exponential growth that will help get fares back to some sort of sense of normality. But that debt will remain for some time, Chris. The other thing to remember is, other thing to consider is, there are some levers that airlines are using to contend with those costs, which is, of course, phasing out a lot of the older fleet, retiring older fleet, gas guzzlers. The airlines still taking delivery of new aircraft, which really is quite phenomenal when you think about it. But mostly to replace older airframes. The other thing I've seen recently is I've been amazed at the amount of startups that are in discussion or being considered over the last. Starting with a greenfield greenfield site, blank sheet of paper, without any of the historic costs or the losses that have been carried through this period. Not a bad prospect. They can probably pick up aircraft relatively inexpensively as well. I think there's something to be said for that. So but in the short term, I suspect that fares will go up. Just also, Chris, as a reflection of the reality when it comes to dealing with all these other, you talk about technology, we spoke before about PPE, we spoke about testing, and all of this stuff required for crew, and they have to change layover patterns, change the slips, and all of these things have had to change, and therefore we will see some short-term spikes in cost per seat. We saw that in the results we've seen from EasyJet and Ryanair in recent months, and we'll see it across the board. So but flying post-COVID might be more complex and more challenging, which generally makes things more costly.
Yep, 100%. Yep. And now just and another point, which was encouraging, because people have been talking about sustainability for a long time, but people are now, you're talking about debt, you're talking about the impact. Now people, I think, are getting also a little bit wiser with that balance, because you can't just keep focus on clean. Obviously you have to, but there's a balance now between people, planet, and profit. And if there isn't that amount of money there, people aren't going to be able to invest. They're not going to be able to change. So that whole spectrum of what's right is going to have to be spread more equally and over a longer period of time for people to come to terms with that. But one good bit of news there was the Clean Planet Energy, introducing ultra clean jet fuel, which is great news. So wherever possible, electric vehicles, great news, but do they have the electric supply at airports? So that's another conundrum that they've got to address. So
we've been speaking about this for 20 years as well.
Exactly. But what I'm saying is, I think people now are starting to realise, now everybody's listening to what's going on in the news. Where does all this money come from? Taxes, etc. There's going to be adjustments. So, for the next long period of time, people are going to have to become accustomed to all of this.
Well, the funding from the taxpayer, those taps will have to be turned off at some point.
Yep.
Or certainly, if they're not going to be turned off, they'll have to be lessened. The flow of taxpayers' money to support the economy will have to be controlled or restricted. We can't continue. I mean, I know I was speaking to some people this week. They are patently aware they are in jobs on furlough that no longer exist.
Yeah.
That, in my view, is an abuse of taxpayers' money. It doesn't detract from the situation the person's in, but it's an abuse of taxpayers' money. And unfortunately, those kind of things will have to be scrutinized at every level. And I think it will cast a very, very, very dark shadow over employers who have been doing this. So to stop them, having to lay out redundancy fees. We saw the bad behavior from the Norwegians, didn't we?
Yeah.
Allegedly,
yeah.
Who unscrupulously behaved extremely unscrupulously and didn't cough up the redundancy. So the reason they kept people on furlough for as long as they could was actually not to terminate the employment and therefore be liable for a redundancy payment. So I do think that the government have to come down harder on that. Unfortunately, I know that's not maybe what a lot of people want to hear at this difficult time, but the reality is that we can't continue to support jobs that no longer exist. What we will have to do is look creatively as a whole, as individual states and countries and government, and look at where the alternatives of sources of employment are. Because if they are being propped up, that is in my view not very good use of taxpayers' funds.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just for those who are watching, they would have seen a snapshot of you that came on the screen there. That was very cleverly done. It was a little bit of subliminal marketing. I think it was a beautiful picture from your boy band days, Steve. It was really spectacular. You're gonna have to watch it. You're gonna have to watch it back now and see that. It was just a bang like that. It just came across. It was really good.
Are you suggesting that it might have been an older photograph?
There's you know me and the Dorian Gray terminology. So I know you don't age, mate. You're the Peter Pan of aviation, son, and long may it last.
Might not age, but certainly the weight challenges, Chris. This is always a problem, especially sitting at home lockdown. We're supposed to be in Langkawi now. We're supposed to leave for Langkawi yesterday, but unfortunately, Malaysia lockdown was extended yet again. I didn't gripe. I didn't grumble. I got online. I transferred my flights, changed the dates, changed the hotel. I accepted that there was a risk of booking travel that I might not go. So I think a lesson for everybody: if you do book travel during this time, you have to accept that it may or may not result in you getting on an airplane. But for those that can travel, please do. And our industry needs you.
And what
as a wartime poster may have once said.
Yes, you're not your country yet, but your industry. Well, no, the whole world needs it. Yeah, but you know, everybody's ready and waiting, so there will be a huge bounce back. And now is the time, pre-season training, so that you bring back better.
Indeed.
Right, lovely boy. I'll
Very good.
Farewell.
Bid you adieu.
Next week. Okay, look forward to seeing you. And please God, even more good news.
Thanks. No rugby this weekend, Chris.
I know.
Break this weekend.
I'm
thoroughly disappointed. I'm not quite sure what to do with myself.
Yeah, no, the games have been
so
fantastic.
I will. Yeah, I've got. I think next week looks good. We've got Scotland France on Sunday that I'll be watching. Unfortunately, it's another late kickoff. We've got a 10 p.m. curfew here, so that's a bit of a bugger. But I'll have to watch it at home or. Yeah. Watch it at home. That's all I'll say.
Exactly. But Scotland are doing really well, huh?
I will be for Terry Ramage's benefit. I'll have the saltire on my back next Sunday as we watch Scotland take on our Gaelic friends.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, lovely boy. Look forward to it. Take care of yourself. Have a good week.
Cheerio.
And thanks to everybody for listening in.
Thanks a lot. See you, Chris.
Take care, mate. All the best.